Alright, now we have the execution of Ted Bundy on the 24th of January 1989. The most interesting thing to me that I'm going to bring up immediately is the 29-degree ascendant. There. And then that's in the progressions. And then in the transits, we have 29 degrees Capricorn. Let's have a look around and see if there's anything else at 29. The MC of the progressions. Okay, what else do we see? Venus is now at 0 degrees of Sagittarius in his progress chart. It's finally moved out of Scorpio, albeit too late because he's dead. Is he free from his feelings of hatred towards women and all the things that happened to him because he's dead and freedom is Sagittarian? I don't know, maybe. Maybe it's just the fact that it's no longer in Scorpio anymore and he can't do this to anybody anymore. Anyway, let's have a look at everything that's going on here. So the progressed Sun and Mars, if we have a look in the 5th house here, are exactly conjunct in Capricorn. And then if we look at the transiting chart for the time of his execution, look at all of this Capricorn here. We've got Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune and Venus all in Capricorn. And then his progressed Sun and Mars sit right between Neptune and Venus. So Capricorn, which is Saturn ruled, again is showing me that his entire life and everything about it, even right coming up to the end of it, is Capricorn, was Capricorn driven. Everything that this Saturn did constantly throughout the entire time that we were looking at these charts ultimately led up to this release of everything from in Scorpio and Sagittarius over to Capricorn. No longer is it in this 4th house. It's now in the 5th house. It's away from here, where it has been this entire time. It's quite amazing. It's all moved off into this other house. There's no residue of it at all. The only residue that I can see of this 4th house hell that he had is Venus, which has now moved into Sagittarius, so it's not in Scorpio anymore. Jupiter's managed to stay in Scorpio, but it's moved past Venus natally, finally. So yeah, all the remnants of everything here have moved along. So it's so interesting to see that it's all moved from that 4th all throughout his life, right up until 1989. It took, you know, every aspect that was happening and everything that was going on was constantly between the 4th house, the 12th house, the 8th house, and often the 6th. And now it's all moved into this 5th house. Freedom for people around him, freedom for people in society, freedom for his victims, freedom for himself, or restrictions for himself, but freedom for other people with this Capricorn. It's a little confusing when you look at it like that. But, okay, another thing we have, let's have a look. The transiting Sun and Mercury were conjunct in Aquarius at this point in time. There's another close little conjunction. Transiting Mars is in that spot again, in conjunct the Sun, the 9th house of the law. This is a law, this area. And it seems law did have its ultimate last say. He was executed. So, you know, that was inevitable. The moon, when transiting moon when he was executed, was again at 3 degrees of Virgo, and you might remember going back a little bit, it's sat at 3 degrees quite a few times, and that is squaring his natal sun, which to me sort of puts an end to the emotions that he had about himself, you know, how he felt about everybody, women, people, his siblings, or his mother. Mercury could be his mother there, you know, Mercury in the 4th. That's an interesting insight. Yeah, it's pretty amazing actually, but I'm going to show you something else on the next page, but before I do, let's just have a quick look at this for a second. His progressed moon as well is also at 2 degrees. Look at that, we've got the moon 2 degrees there, so aspecting this transiting moon, that's aspecting the sun at 2 degrees, Venus at 0 degrees. That's wide though, in the 4th house. Probably just get rid of that one. In conjunct this transiting sun at 4 degrees, in conjunct there. And there was something else about that moon that was, oh yeah, the progressed moon. Oh, sorry, it's completely conjunct transiting Chiron in Cancer. And oh, of course, completely eluding me then, it was right in front of my face. Being in Cancer here, and all of these in Capricorn, we've got Mercury, progressed Mercury at 4 degrees, transiting Uranus at 3. They are opposing this moon and Chiron here, Mercury and Uranus. So Uranus is like the higher, what's it called? It's a higher level of learning than Mercury. So it's almost as if when he was executed, possibly just prior to his execution, he may have had a realization of how his life could have turned out with this moon, Mercury, Uranus, Venus changing sign, all this Capricorn. You know, maybe he realized that life could have been a different way. Who knows? Another interesting point here is that at that event time, right at that time, the midheaven was 16 degrees of Scorpio, and that's the end of the end of the matter, the end of his life. 16 Scorpio. So the MC of the moment he was executed became his IC, which is pretty amazing to see actually. If that doesn't sort of show you the end of someone's life, then I don't know what does. that's not true. You can't always say that the transiting MC, when it becomes your IC, becomes your death. That's not true. But in looking at this chart, we can see that obviously it's pretty important. Transiting Pluto is at 15 as well, Scorpio, right next to that MC and right next to the IC. So, you know, the ultimate transformation occurred for him at that point in time. And that was his death. Luckily for everybody. Okay, I'll clear this off. Now, there is another chart that I'm going to show you on the next page, which will show you a little bit clearer than this one. So let's have a look. Here is the event chart for the minute that he was executed. Now, I know I said we weren't going to look at the event chart by itself for any of these, but I think this is important because let's have a look. Look at the ascendant, 29 degrees of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Where's Saturn? In the 12th house at 8 degrees. That's where his natal Saturn is, 8 degrees. In the 12th house. Different sign, but hey, it's the end of his life. It makes more sense it being in Capricorn now. So the ruler of Ted, which is the ascendant, is the end of Ted because it's Saturn in the 12th house. He died in prison. That's the death of Ted Bundy right there. And not only that, we have, as I mentioned before, there's Ted Bundy's IC, which is now the MC. There's Pluto. So right at that time, that's what was happening. This is the zenith. Shows us what's happening at the time. We have Jupiter at conjunct Algol. Don't know how that really plays out. I mean, he was electrocuted, so I don't know what would have happened to his head, but well, actually, no, I do know what happened to his head. It would have burned, and that is exactly what Algol represents. It's not just losing one's head, it's also burning. So that's quite representative of what happened to him too, although Jupiter doesn't necessarily represent our body, so but the 4th house does represent the end of the matter. But you see his 4th house at that time is now 16 Taurus, which used to be his midheaven. So, you know, the beginning of his life, it was at the top, and at the end, it's at the bottom. It's interesting. I wanted to show you as well that the Arabic parts in this chart is really super interesting. The moon is conjunct the 8th house, obviously we can see that. Here it is, at 3 degrees, conjunct the 8th of death. The sun is conjunct the part of death at 4 degrees. Mercury has gone retrograde again, as it was at his birth. So that's interesting. That's heading towards the sun. I'm surprised that's not a little bit closer, actually, but anyway. Chiron's opposite fatality, the part of fatality, which is the end of his life. Where's Chiron? Is there. Interestingly, Uranus conjuncts that, and we can see that here, which is also on that 12th house cusp. Prison. His fatal moment in time, which is also conjunct with Saturn, mind you, all these two here, exactly there on the 12th house cusp in prison. So yeah, it's very, very interesting that this chart shows us the 29-degree Capricorn ascendant, which is Ted. This is a horary page, by the way, but I just like to put the horary page up because it shows us the closest moon aspects and the fixed stars as well. So we can see we've got some pretty close fixed stars and our moon aspects. But this is, I'm not reading it as a horary. I just like these extras that the solar fire shows. If we look at aspects here, we can see we've got a mystic rectangle between the moon, Chiron, North Node, and Saturn, of course, and Uranus, which is an opposing Chiron. They're opposing each other, and they're sextiling each other. There's obviously too much yellow on here. I have to highlight this though, because that to me is just probably the most amazing part of this, that his Saturn self is at the same degree of his birth in the 12th house of prison when he died. And when he died, his IC was his actual natal MC, and his MC became the IC in his natal chart. So it's a complete swap around. We've also got Leo intercepted and Aquarius intercepted in the 1st and 7th house. So his Saturn at 8 degrees of Leo in his natal chart would have been sitting in this interception of the 7th house, as you'll note if you go back to the last chart that I just showed. And that shows us that his death was a matter of business at that time. He was an enemy of the state, an open enemy, and he was killed because of it. Interceptions always show me things that are almost 12th house like, so prison, very much so. But yeah, we remember his 12th house was Leo. Chuck that in here, and that's the enemy of the state at that time. Okay. So yeah, so how interesting is that? I mean, we have Saturn in June of 66 at 29 degrees of Pisces, January of 74 at 29 degrees nearly of Gemini, June 78 Saturn's at 29 degrees of Leo, January 74 the Sun and Venus were both at 29 degrees of Sagittarius and Capricorn. And then in 1989 the ascendant and descendant were at 29 degrees, but the ascendant, which represented Ted Bundy himself at the time, was at 29 degrees of Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, which sits at 8 degrees of Capricorn in the 12th house, which shows us that he died in prison where he belonged. Pretty simple, but also pretty amazing how accurate that is. Let's also just quickly note that the moon, which is conjunct the 8th house, is forming an aspect, a trine, exactly to Uranus, which is on the 12th house cusp. It's actually forming a grand trine to Mars in the 3rd house at 2 degrees there. So yeah, there's this grand trine here, you know, it's his grand trine of death, pretty much. Have a little look around, not much more I can see. So yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, there is obviously a couple more things that we could have talked about. You know, he had legal skills coming out the wazoo. Apparently, I could see through him a mile away, and I don't know why that judge at all played into his games. I think it was pretty sick, actually. It was horrible to watch. He used that courtroom to indulge in his fantasies of reliving this crime, and obviously at the time they didn't know about serial killers, they didn't realise that that's what he was doing, but it's pretty obvious that's what he was doing. He got them to repeat everything in gory detail, the condition of his victims' bodies and things like that. And that fourth house really sort of, that fourth, eighth and 12th house in his charts, in all of them, they show me that. It shows me that he has this sick need to want to relive things over and over again. He can't get out of the past. Is that I see that fourth house. He's stuck in this, I don't know, he's stuck in something that happened in childhood, and as awful as it was, many people go through worse and don't kill 36 people. So, you know, I think that it is a combination of his natal chart, his external environment that was put on him as a child, his parents, his family, and then how that internally affected him. Seems to be driven by Saturn in his chart, and the moon and the sun. Everything is driven by the same things. He couldn't get over those things. His mother and his father completely and utterly destroyed him, but it doesn't mean that he had to go and kill 36 women. That's, you know, that's his choice. He knew right from wrong. When you watch the show, sometimes you'll consider the fact that he must be insane, because how could he possibly stand there and ask these questions? But he's doing it as a manipulation. He's doing it purposely. He enjoys these things. So, you know, he's a sick man, definitely, but he knew what he was doing. I think the ability that he had to charm people as well and make people laugh, because you'll notice that when you watch the series, that when he's in court, he can make people laugh so easily. It's the moon in Sagittarius. It makes people feel at ease. It can make you a little bit more overconfident than you actually are as well. But what you're seeing in the courtroom is his moon in Sagittarius and his Saturn in Leo and his Leo ascendant. He put on an act, and to a degree it worked. He definitely won over the judge, which was strange. But basically his psychopathic narcissistic disorder was absolutely immense. As Karen noted on the group, he talked about himself in the third person, as you'll see in the show, and I think that a big part of that, as like Karen said, is the opposition between his moon, Mars and Uranus in his natal chart, and I think Mercury going retrograde also played a part in that. I also do believe that retrograde Mercury and Venus going to the left, and then the Sun and Mars and the other planets going to the right, just put a wedge in there, and it gave him, that Mercury gave him the ability to talk bullshit basically by pushing everything into that third house in retrograde. inevitably it all didn't come to an end until it moved into the 5th, and that's when he was executed. So, or it could be in the 6th in that point, but far away from the 4th. So yeah, I hope you can keep up with me. I hope you have kept up with me. Please, any questions that you might have, write them down or ask me or whatever. But probably the best thing to do is just to watch over and over again and take it in. And please just note 29 degrees all the time. Look for it. Look where the moon is, look where the sun is, look where Mars is, and look where Saturn is. And to finish it off, have a look at your fixed stars as well, because that always shows you some interesting things. One last little thing I wanted to show you, and that was the same chart of the execution, but with all 3 again. But this time we have his progressions in the middle and also on the outside here. So not only was the event chart at 29 Capricorn, his progressed chart was at 29 degrees Virgo rising. The IC was 29 degrees of Saggy. (29 Cancer on the DC, 29 Gemini on the MC. We've got tons of 29, and that's just by flipping the charts around. That's by putting the progressions on the inside instead of his natal. His natal's in the middle here, and the event chart is on the outside here. So yeah, have a look at that. 29, 29, 29, 29. So have a think about it, see what you reckon. Here's some more 29. I can highlight all the 29s as well. MC. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 29 degree points on the day that he was executed. Pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so there we go. Oh, well, before we go, we should have a look at this 4th house now. When we put the progressions on the outside, okay, everything moves back to the 4th. The end of the matter is Capricorn. Death. Okay, I hope that helped. See you later.